There's a saying these days that batteries and energy storage makes the energy transition go round. And I'm going to talk to Leonard Olien, who's the Canadian Renewable Energy Association's Director of Energy Storage. So welcome to the interview, Leonard.
Thank you very much, Markham. Happy to be here.
Now, this storage is absolutely key to the expansion of electricity generation and distribution. And electricity, of course, I mean, we're basically electrifying our economy over the next 30 years. So you can't say enough about how important storage is. So what kind of storage technologies are we talking about, particularly at utility scale?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, because that's an area where the storage technology is getting a lot of interest and activity right now. In terms of what's being installed, we're seeing a lot of lithium-ion batteries because they're reliable. People understand how they work. The costs have come down, somewhere in the order of 90% in the past 10 years. So we're seeing a lot of that happen. We already have, like, globally, a lot of pumped hydros is installed. That's just back because it's consistent with hydro development that dates back hundreds of years. But we're also starting to see a lot of technology research, development, especially around longer duration technologies. And so, especially as we think about in the CanRIA, we published our 2050 vision, and that calls for a 10-fold increase in the deployment of wind and solar in Canada by 2050. So we're going to need a lot of storage in order to make that balance out. And as we get more and more of that, we'll understand whether we need longer and longer duration. So some of those technologies, flow batteries, compressed air, maybe hydrogen, maybe more pumped hydro will come.
Now, I've done a number of interviews with experts who talk about the advantage that Canada has because it has, 60% of its electricity comes from hydro. BC, Manitoba, Quebec in particular have huge hydro resources. And that essentially hydro dams can act as storage for intermittent renewables. So you have lots of opportunity in Saskatchewan Saskatchewan and Alberta, bookended by BC and Manitoba. You've got Ontario, then right next door to Quebec, and so on. What are policymakers and utilities telling your organization about, their plans to knit this together, the hydro and the renewables?
The challenge there of knitting together the hydro and renewables seems like a great idea. You have both political difficulties, especially across Alberta, deregulated market now connecting to regulated markets. It feels, a lot of market participants feels like you're kind of now subsidizing BC taxpayers and BC government. You also have very technical challenges, right? Like, this is connecting Saskatchewan to Manitoba is not so bad. Going across the Rocky Mountains is a bigger deal. So storage becomes another one of those flexibility providers. So along with transmission, along with demand response, storage can provide flexibility in this sort of decarbonized world with lots of wind and solar.
Okay. I noticed in the press release that your organization released, it says that utilities and systems operators need to be educated about storage. That took me a bit by surprise, because I would have thought that if there's a group that is up on storage technologies, that would be it.
So that's a fair point. I mean, because they really do a great job we don't think about how reliable the electricity grid really is compared to a lot of the other technical things in our life. So they do a really good job of that. My challenge is that there are a lot of preconceived notions about what storage can do. People think about storage as either, or mainly about balancing renewable energy. And really there's 13 different services energy storage can provide. And I have those listed in the white paper. You can get a copy of the white paper on our website, Renewables Association. .ca. And so my challenge to system developers and utility operators is to really think about all of those services when they're thinking about adding new transmission and including that in their planning.
Now, I had mentioned while we were off camera that I do a lot of reporting on electricity systems in Europe and the US, and they're talking about modernizing their grid and updating some of their transmission technologies, integrating storage, that sort of thing. And it seems like that conversation at the utility level here in Canada is still hardly getting off the ground. Is that a fair comment from your point of view? I mean, you talk to these people all the time.
Yeah, I think we're behind where Europe and the United States are, and other global entities, Australia. But I am seeing a lot more activity, a lot more interest. And that's partly why the timing of this initiative is a really big one, because we are starting to see changes in Alberta in terms of sort of rules and consideration. Ontario in the same way, interest in other provinces as well about how do we use storage? Is this going to be useful as we continue to decarbonize? So I think we're a little bit behind, but I'm starting to like what I see. And so now is really a good time to get really good information out there to people, so decision makers can make good decisions.
Now, when we were talking about the interties between provinces, and you mentioned regulatory issues, political issues. Well, one of the issues is that most provinces, their electricity systems are run by Crown-owned corporations, and they have their own little fiefdom. And the fiefdoms, the 10 fiefdoms across Canada don't talk to each other very much. And so, to what extent are Crown-owned utilities potentially barriers to using more storage compared to, say, Alberta, where you have a market-based system and an independent system operator, where it strikes me they might be more open to it?
The good news is you don't have to be deregulated in order to deploy storage. And yes, they are 10 separate entities, and they all, if you've met one utility operator, you've met one utility operator. They all run their systems differently, and they all have their different values and interests. So part of one of the things that we're trying to do is at least make sure that the regulatory framework in each of those provinces provides context for those utilities to look at and evaluate energy storage, again, with all of those different services in mind, and then to also make sure that there are ways of valuing those different services within the context. So either if you're, some provinces they contract with private developers and they run competitive processes to make that happen, even within the Crown utility context. Others, the Crown utility does everything. But in either case, the utility needs to be able to say, well, this is going to have this much value, and so we can go to our regulatory agency or the government or the public and say this is a worthwhile investment because these are the values that we're giving. And so we want to make sure that people understand all those different services and have a way of valuing them in order to move forward.
This is kind of a related question, but what role should markets play in the adoption of storage?
If we have markets, that's great. There's lots of great things storage can do in a market. And if it's a regulated utility, that's okay too. They can still use storage. There's still lots of benefits there in terms of the system services they can provide, managing congestion, and things like that.
Okay. There's a line from your white paper that I want to get you to comment on. On average, Canada's transmission and distribution lines are used at a fraction of their capacity. That surprised me. I wouldn't have suspected that.
Yeah. Well, so thank you very much for giving me a chance to explain that, because I can understand why that's confusing. So just for some little historical context, right, the system has been built with sort of peak paradigm, right? There's a peak demand, and we need to build enough transmission and enough generation in order to meet that peak demand. So what they do then, and this happens now, is if you're coming with a 100 megawatt generation facility, whatever type, we connect that to a transmission line that has 100 megawatts of capacity. But now if you look over the course of a year, the amount of energy generated by that facility is only going to be a fraction of the full capacity of that line over the course of the year. So that represents a huge amount of transmission capability that's not being used. And so what we would like to advocate for is, by using energy storage, we can make more efficient of that space. If you want to go add more capacity or more load growth on one end, you can make use of that space that's already there by shifting the time of when the energy comes and gets delivered to people. So that's what we're talking about. We think there's opportunities both to use the existing infrastructure more efficiently and to either delay or avoid building lots more transmission infrastructure, keep those costs down, and also the stakeholder impacts, right? Energy storage is a relatively compact deployment technology compared to running a transmission line over, say, hundreds of kilometers. That's lots of farmers' fields or natural environments that you're going to impact. And so that should be all considered when we're looking at these solutions.
Right. And that, I guess, gets back to the earlier question about east-west trade between the provinces, because most of the provinces have interties, but it's generally thought that they don't have enough interties to do more of the kind of east-west trade we were talking about. But if in fact those transmission lines are underutilized, And I also want to throw in another angle here. The Americans talk a lot about grid enhancing technologies. So you're going to put a lot more power through the lines that you do have. So it sounds like the combination of all of those, we could get a lot more mileage out of the transmission infrastructure we do have.
Yeah, exactly. That's the perception of some of these technologies, but using more advanced analytics and computing power than we had, 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. Combine that with storage that allows you to shift the time of delivery. And we can do a lot without running a lot more transmission lines. And I mean, just to be fair, storage might not be the most effective or appropriate solution in every situation. I can accept that. What I would like, and what a lot of these changes, is at least think about storage and evaluate storage fairly before going ahead with a different solution. And so that's why a lot of these sort of the 6 priorities in our paper are guided on making sure that there's an open evaluation of that of storage in that context.
Leonard, I'm not an industry insider. This is not my area of technical expertise, but as someone who reports on the industry quite often, I'm struck by the level of technical change, technology change within the industry. Batteries, analytics, software, new distribution, all of that sorts of. My sense of this is that energy storage plays, of course, a big role in this, but it's all the bundle of technologies together that will allow any particular utility to be able to say, hey, I can now engineer a solution to my issues here around intermittent, renewables, and I can make my grid work with all of these, the new generation technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why the title of our paper is Laying the Foundation. I think that storage is sort of the foundational piece of that. It enables a lot of that. If you want to involve time of use rates, if you want to include better software in order to manage your distribution system or your transmission system better, storage becomes a fundamental tool in making that happen. And I think we're just seeing the beginning of all of that. The ideas are just coming, and utilities are getting used to that. And so hold on to your seats. There's lots going on.
Now, the next question has a lot to do with distributed energy, which of course is usually solar, but sometimes wind as well. And on the one hand, there's an opportunity for microgrids. And again, you see a lot of interest in that in the US, not so much in Canada. But I read the Alberta Electrical System Operators report last year, and there are a lot of utilities worried about big commercial customers self-generating and using storage to basically, they don't need the grid anymore. To what extent are microgrids and self-generation by commercial customers going to be an issue for utilities?
That is, you hit a big button that's going on. There's a big process going on in California right now, arguing about what those rates should be and how that should be treated. I don't have the magic wand to find an answer for that. What I am excited about is that the conversation has started and that there's a recognition. I think what people isn't well understood is what exactly is that value. Kind of refers back to the methodologies we've talked about before. What is the value that having distributed energy, solar and storage brings, and what are the costs that it actually saves you? And starting to understand that compared to the big fear is recovering the fixed costs that have been spent already. So there's going to be a ton of work and a ton of good thought about what is the right way to do that, and what's the right way to incentivize people and send pricing signals. And again, that's another one of those topics that we're really just getting started on. I mean, I think the good news is that storage and distributed generation offers an opportunity for local communities to actually participate in the electricity system and feel that they have the ability to meet their own economic and social and environmental goals. And storage certainly enables that participation on a new level. So, and that's a good thing.
Well, that's an interesting take on this, because I've often wondered, and I'll back up just a little bit. I've interviewed, people like Tony Seba, for instance, who say that the existence in the very near future of abundant, clean, and the cost near, the marginal cost almost at zero, has the potential to revolutionize local economies. And so we might talk about, rural towns and small cities that, can generate a bunch of this, cheap electricity and then attract industry or develop industry locally to take advantage of it. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that opportunity is huge because now if you're a community and you have some of these goals, storage becomes one of those tools that you can actively engage in and participate in. And so it's going to change the way utilities, I think, interact with their customers, because it's not just, we're here and you have to depend on us. And they're already starting to do that. There are a number of them that are starting to get more innovative about, okay, what is the service that we provide to you? What's the value that we provide to you? And how do we make this all work?
Final question, Leonard. How important is sustainability in the circular economy approach to the rapid adoption of battery storage at utility scale?
Yeah, sustainability is essential, right? Like that's kind of the big umbrella of everything that we're doing here. One of the reasons we don't see a lot or hear a lot of discussion about battery recycling is that there aren't a huge supply of old batteries yet, especially of these utility scale type things. But the good news is there are a number of companies that are already talking about recycling of things like batteries. CanREA, again, with the tenfold expansion of wind and solar that we talk about in the 2050 vision, that's going to be, in 2050, we're going to have a lot of sort of retired wind turbines and solar panels and batteries. And so we are already working. We have a group in our operations group that's already talking about recycling and end of life and sustainable development, including development on the front end as well. And so we're adding energy storage to that framework, and we're just going to keep that's going to be key all the way through.
And I should point out that Canada has some very innovative companies in this space. Li-Cycle, it would be the biggest, I think, where basically they can recycle 95% of a lithium-ion battery. So I don't know if we're global leaders, but we certainly seem to have some leading-edge companies here in Canada.
It's certainly one of those things where there's lots of activity, and Canada is active in it. And it also relates to some of that research I mentioned before about saying, well, are the materials we can make batteries out of that are less, demanding less of those rare earth metals, or maybe less toxic, and we'll try to recycle it. So, pay attention. That's lots of interesting things happening there.
Yeah, I should point out to our viewers that we've done recent interviews with, there's one in the last couple of weeks on iron flow batteries for a utility scale that don't have any critical minerals in them. And apparently, there's aqueous organic flow batteries, all sorts of exotic technologies that look like they're going to be coming onto the market in the next, say, 5 to 10 years. Yeah,
lots of changes on that technology space, and with the demand growing, and some of that perception that with lithium ion in particular, it's great for, there's a high energy density, so it's great for our mobile applications, but maybe we don't need that in our grid scale storage, and let's save the lithium for cars and phones.
Sounds good. Leonard, thank you very much. Really appreciate your insights.
I appreciate you having me. You have a great day.